Welcome back. I did want to spend a little bit of time on the cost of production chapter. And one of the reasons is as you go through that chapter, it gets really messy. You've got implicit, explicit cost, total cost. You got all sorts of things and formulas and stuff that makes it hard to figure out how you actually go about making decisions. So let me break this down a little bit for you. Let's start with the question of cost. And so the real question here is, how much is an organization going to put onto the market at what price? And so how do you make those kind of decisions about those kind of very important questions? Because it all obviously gets back to the question of a organization wants to be profitable, and they want to, as we see today, more profitable this year than last year. And what do they want next year? More profitable next, and on it goes. And so there's no real way to make sense of that without trying to get into some of the issues. So let's talk about what I think of as a far simpler way to understand cost than what your textbook does. I would argue that there are two fundamental costs that show up in an organization. There are variable cost and fixed cost. And so let's start with a fixed cost. What's a fixed cost? A fixed cost is the building. Okay, doesn't matter if you're open or closed, you're still paying for the building. You've also got issues like taxes that are going to be paid. You're going to have some utilities that are going to be fixed costs. You're going to have other costs that are going to be there regardless of whether you're open or closed or whatever else. But a variable cost means that you've got some costs that are going to be going up and down every day, month, week, whatever the time frame you're talking about. And so typically you're going to be talking about labor costs. So if we've got a rush order and we got to have worked everybody, an extra 20 hours this week of overtime in order to get this job out, what happens to our labor costs? They're going to shoot up. If suddenly we don't have any orders and we're sending people home early, well then theoretically your labor costs are going to go down. Now, let's be fair. Some labor costs are in fact fixed because some people are on salary. And so it doesn't matter, if we're working extra or less, they're still going to get paid roughly the same, but you're going to have a significant portion of your labor costs that are going to go up and down. How about the cost of materials? Okay, so the cost of materials is going to go up or down based on how much we are trying to produce, how much we're trying to kick out into the marketplace, whoever our customers are. And so that is also going to be variable. Now, theoretically, you're also going to have some utilities that will go up or down a little bit. But normally, I would like to think about utilities as more of a fixed cost because you've got basic stuff that's going to happen there. So understanding that question is an interesting one. So let me give you an economic example of this. Back 20 years ago, I was working full-time for another college. And I was also spending a fair amount of time as a consultant trainer for several organizations. So I was making a fair amount of money being a consultant trainer on the side. So, and many people thought I was actually pretty good at it, and they said, well, you ought to do this full-time. So the question is, should I do that full-time? Well, what happens? When I'm doing that as a side business, okay, so what are my costs? Do I have any fixed costs? Do I have an office? Do I have to have lots of equipment? Do I have to have assistants? Do I have to have all the stuff that goes with being an organization? The answer is probably not. I don't need any of that stuff. And so what do I have? I have some variable costs in terms of how much time I spend and supplies for various training events that I was doing or other kinds of things. But the answer was, if I were to abandon my full-time job as a full-time teacher and simply become a consultant trainer, what are my opportunity cost issues? Well, surprise, surprise. My opportunity cost is suddenly my rate that I have to charge has to go up a lot because now I got to have my own office. Now I got to have my own organization. And what do I also have to do? I have to have enough money to, compensate myself appropriately. But I've also got to cover my healthcare costs. I got to cover my retirement. I got to cover, all the other stuff that my organization was willing to do for me. So what I did is I ran the numbers and I went, you got to be kidding me. I am going to stay as a part-time consultant trainer because I would run myself out of business. My rates would have to be so high that who's going to hire me to do this kind of stuff? And so I was able to actually undercut my competition because my costs were low. That would be an example. Now, I'm going to give you a couple other examples later of how this stuff works. Let me add one other screwy little category. We don't see much on this one, stranded costs, but an example of this is, for example, Consumers Energy decides that they're going to build a power generation facility. Could be coal, could be natural gas, could be, whatever, doesn't matter. Because they're what's called a regulated monopoly, okay, not a pure monopoly, but a special category monopoly, the government allows them to build that and then charge us a little bit every month in our bill for 50 years to write off those costs that are actually incurred. So we don't have to bear the whole cost all at one time, which would be a huge hit to our bills. But a stranded cost means that that cost is hanging out there someplace and that we're gradually working our way down on that particular one. So part of the issues here is understanding fixed costs, variable costs, and how that plays out, and how profit shows up in this picture. Well, the accountants, and I love my accountant friends, and I have some good friends at Jackson College that are accountants, but many of them see profit as a relatively simple little process. You have revenue, you have cost, you subtract, you get profit. And I would argue, wait a minute, it's far more complicated than that. And so part of the reason why I throw opportunity cost in here is that when we think about profit in an economic sense, we're talking about not only cost, revenue, but we're also talking about what else we could do with that space, those people, that, whatever we're talking about. I'm going to give you another example of how that works. I was doing some work for Eaton Corporation in Ann Arbor when they had a facility there. We were making a little part that went on a car, safety part. So if you were to flip your car, in the movies, what happens when somebody flips their car? It bursts into a ball of fire and the gas, terrible stuff. The answer is that doesn't happen, or at least doesn't happen very often, because Eaton had made this part that would automatically close your gas tank, and so that your gas couldn't leak. Okay? So Eaton, as a corporation, had bought this little company that was doing this, and they were a monopoly. They had a patent, and they had the patent for 17 years or 19 years or whatever it was, and so they could charge a premium price for that little piece. So what's going on here with this story? Guess what? The patent's running out. And they are worried that the competition is going to step in and undercut their price and whatever. So one of the things we were trying to do was figure out how to cut our costs and reduce all sorts of things with all this stuff. The problem is that's pretty hard to do. So the example at Eaton Corporation that makes sense here is that Eaton was producing, say, 4 different parts or products that were being produced in this plant. Well, surprisingly enough, you had a product that would, in marketing terms, be called a star. Was it very profitable? You bet it was. And then you had product B that was, is fine. You're making profit on it. You had C that was, sort of breaking even. And then you were doing this D stuff that was actually, quote, losing us money. So what we typically do in the accounting world is you draw a line here and say, that's our cost line. And anything that falls below the line, what are you supposed to do with it? Boom, get rid of it. Okay, and that's fine. Sometimes that's the correct answer. Not always. And so in an economic sense, what do? We think about this one and say, if we don't do D, what else are we going to do with the people? What are we going to do with the space? What are we going to do with, all the other stuff that is attached to this particular product? And if the answer is we need all that space, we need all those people because we got to do more of A, then fine, not a problem. But what happens? Doesn't our fixed cost now go up? Why does it go up? Because we're now sharing those fixed costs across the organization. Again, it's only 3 products instead of 4 products. So what happens to this line? Line goes up to here. Okay, so what do the accountants say? The accountants will say, well, C is now losing us money. So what do we got to do? Got to get rid of C. We got to stay with our good products, the ones we make money with. Well, now what's going on? Our fixed costs are being spread across 2 products. The line goes up. Now what do? We get rid of B, because B is now a dog, no longer making us money, and we simply focus on A. But what do you have in the organization? You have a significant portion of the plant that is now empty, but are we still paying for it? Sure. Actually, General Motors, Ford, they had these huge plants back in the day where you had, square block plants. And one of them I did a fair amount of work in was the Ford Livonia transmission plant. And towards the end, when I got there, they had 10,000 employees back in the 80s. When I was there back in the early 2000s, they were down to 200 employees, and they were using a corner of the building. And of course, their costs were through the roof because, they just, and the answer was they had all the fixed costs that they were sort of absorbing in this little corner. And so what happens? We focus on A. What happens when A is the only product we do? We got to ship this product to Mexico because that's the only way we can profitably make this stuff. The answer is not nearly so simple. And shouldn't we be thinking about what happens here? And at Eaton, this particular product, or a group of engineers and other folks who were doing specialty products for customers. So do you typically make a ton of money on specialty products? Probably not, in most cases. But what was happening is, who were they taking care of? They were taking care of their best customers with their best customers' special needs. And so even though they were losing some money by doing this stuff, did it actually show up over here in some very positive ways? Sure did. And so the accountants sometimes have some notions that can maybe sometimes do some bad things to us, where economics, and I'm not saying the economic way is the right way, it's just a different way. And I think we ought to pay a little bit more attention to the economic principles that may show up here. Let me give you one other example before I end this one. So if you're going to any college, a college typically will say, we're not going to run a class unless we got 9 students or 12 students or 15 students for that particular class, whatever the number is. And the accountants are running the numbers of how many students you got to have to make it viable. Well, couldn't you also ask the question, if that room is going to sit empty, if you don't run the class, aren't you still incurring fixed costs? Sure are. Of course you are. So you could ask this question in a lot of arenas about opportunity costs and what we may be giving up if we lose this stuff. When I come back, we're going to talk about long-run costs, short-run costs, and answer the question on the midterm about, why does McDonald's or Myers or Walmart stay open 24 hours? So we're going to get to those questions, as well as economy of scale. This economy of scale comes next. Thank you.